Time now for the Daily Answer, sponsored by Salem Surround on The Answer Now TV.
Feels strange to be talking about a January 6th breaking news item 5 years after the events. Obviously, we have gone through a lot as a country, whether that was through the pandemic or, of course, the Biden administration and now the second Trump presidency. But this was one of those issues, as Will said, spurred a lot of conspiracy theories. We kind of haven't heard anything about it over the last 5 years. Even bringing it up felt awkward when I saw this press release that came out this morning. But it's a big moment where they feel like they have arrested the proper person, the suspect in this bombing, or in this attempted bombing during the January 6th protests. The person was in Woodbridge, Virginia, which is not very far from Washington, D.C. You're talking about within an hour. You drive through it very often. I spent some time in Woodbridge. This is essentially just maybe a little outside of a suburb. So they didn't have to go far to find the perpetrator of this, who has been clearly hanging out in this area for 5 years. Probably thought at this point had gotten away with this. You never would have probably thought 5 years later. I think when you probably hit 2 years, 3 years, you're like, I don't think I need to lay low anymore. I'm probably good. But no, you have a new FBI in town, maybe that are actually doing their jobs, and this is what happens. You get an arrest in this moment. Of course, if you don't remember, these were bombs that were planted the night before on January 5th, found later on. These were not all, they were homemade, but these were not dummies.
Right. The FBI, during the Christopher Wray tenure, even called them viable pipe bombs. Yeah. So this wasn't a hoax. It wasn't something to just scare people. They didn't
just play in a bag.
They were viable explosive devices that were homemade. And what you have to remember here is that there was initial outrage. There was a $500,000 reward offered. This was something that there was grainy surveillance footage. They had imagery of this individual placing it. And even Democrats at the time were saying this is an outrage in all of that, all of the stuff that went on that day. But the mystery that unfolded was that they offer a large reward for this suspect. They apparently open an investigation and then for 4 years did nothing on it. And it wasn't as if people were just silent, like, oh, well, I guess the person got away. People on the right in the conservative sphere, including now Deputy Director of the FBI, Dan Bongino, continually pressed this issue. They said there was an attempted terrorist attack on the two headquarters of the two main political parties, one of which, the DNC, had at the time Vice President-elect Kamala Harris speak that day in front of the headquarters. The Secret Service didn't find this device. It was found later. But all of these things open up this big can of worms of what happened. Why did they make no progress? And that was one of the things that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino both said, we are going to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, I want to play a soundbite. This is a flashback just from this past May where they brought this up specifically. This is Dan Bongino on Fox and Friends saying, look, we know that this is one of those open-ended question mark, not closed cases at this point, and we're going to try to make sure people understand that we need to rebuild trust in the FBI. Let's take a listen.
We had to fix it and rebuild public trust. One of the ways to do it is these cases of significant public interest that matter. We had 2 pipe bombs planted on January 6th. I mean, we were told by partisan actors out there this was the insurrection, the world was going to fall apart, and no one seemed to show any interest in this case. The second we got in, I put a team on it, and I said, I want answers on this. And I'm pretty confident that we're closing in on some suspects.
Of course, it brings that up just a handful of months ago, and now here we are.
And this is what I want to hear from people. Call in 1-800-684-3110. Is this something that helps restore the trust in the FBI? Because in what plays out, who this individual is, what their motivations were, it may be that they were a crazy person that had no political motivation. It could be that they were very politically motivated. We will hopefully find that out, and I assume we will through the course of a trial as they've arrested this person now. But what was so shocking is that this happened, an act of terrorism, regardless if they blew up or not, which they thankfully did not. I think that everyone should be thankful that 2 bombs did not blow up that were viable, that could have maimed or killed many people. But the partisan aspect of the FBI, for some reason, shifted away from 2 bombs placed in Washington, D.C., and focused only on people that participated in the riot.
The visuals were not as fun. It probably wasn't as easy because you couldn't just clearly see and identify who these people were. It was very easy to identify who a lot of the January 6th rioters were because there they were. There were their faces. We have facial technology. It wasn't that hard to find. Some were celebrities for that matter. So it certainly wasn't near as fun to go after what was this, which could have caused severe damage, severe chaos. What brings me a lot of hope is that there was some honesty and truth coming from Dan Bongino and the FBI publicly months ago. They gave you a little bit of an inside scoop of what was happening and what they were working on, and now we see the fruits of that labor. That is not how things felt like the last decade or so, where we didn't really know what was going on, and occasionally you'd have a raid, or you would have something like that would happen, and you'd wake up to these moments. No, he actually gave pretty fair warning back in May. I mean, look, if this guy, if he end up being the person, and you heard back in May that they were on your tail, you think you'd be getting out of Woodbridge.
Well, and here's where the distrust in the FBI, I think, under the previous administration eroded even further and showed that they were more interested in partisan action, going after individuals that they could politically target. The end goal was to damage the reputation and future political viability of President Trump, is because what some of the reporting is, a lot of this evidence that they collected that led them to this individual, it wasn't new evidence. The FBI had it back then. So they could have followed this trail to the logical end. Instead, what did they focus on? January 6th, they got a special counsel, Jack Smith. We talked about him yesterday, going after sitting U.S. senators. Why? That's what they wanted to do. They wanted the political use of the DOJ and our system of justice to go after their political enemies instead of tracking down someone that could have actually killed and maimed many people with these bombs that were placed at both the political headquarters. It is so apparent that the narrative that would have come out of this was not something the FBI was interested in pursuing, so they did not. They let it stall out, they moved on, and they pursued all the way to Jack Smith trying to take down President Trump instead of putting this person behind bars that is an actual criminal, actual terrorist. If all these allegations are proven true in court, that is what we are looking at here today. It shows the indictment on the Christopher Wray-led FBI much more than anything else. They could have gotten this person and chose not to. This is a different FBI, and it doesn't fall on deaf ears here that the administration has been taking incoming from the media against who? Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, going after them all this week. Yeah. With all these silly stories in the media. We talked about it with Rick Grinnell yesterday, trying to discredit them. And then what do they do today? They deliver on promises that they said they were going to do.
There'll be a press conference from as soon as we're off the air. I believe they'll be rolling into their press conference, so you're not going to want to miss that. And we'll get bites and we'll play some of that tomorrow if you missed it. That, again, is where we're headed. And it is, like you said, it's a bit of a relief to know that. Now, of course, there has been, like as Will said, attacks on Dan Bongino and on Kash Patel. And look, I think anyone in politics, anyone who's running our country should not be immune to really being dug into what they're doing, what they're working on, if it's going to be what they want. However, as Will said, you got to make sure, especially when you're one of those people who start sharing these stories, sharing these rumors, or whatever it may be, or causing just chaos, to remember that some of those actors that are starting that are not on our side, and they are doing it intentionally just to disrupt what's going on in the government.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel. Stay informed anytime, anywhere with the Salem News Channel and 9:30 a.m. TheAnswer.com. This has been The Daily Answer, sponsored by Salem Surround on The Answer Now TV.